And we are right on the hour. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. My name is Dexter Wimberly. I'm a senior critic at New York Academy of Art, also an independent curator based in Japan, originally from New York City. We are joined today by fantastic artist Katherine Bradford. Katherine Bradford's mesmerizing yet rigorous visual language freely traverses the relationship between non-objective and representational painting, allowing potential narratives to unfold and interweave with the investigation of form and color. Vast expanses of color divide her canvases into distinct horizontal planes, while the variations in saturation and tone evoke an elusive yet almost palpable atmosphere. Lighter and darker hues are interchangeable and used without functional or hierarchical distinction, introducing spatial elements such as the sea and the sky, beaches, and poolsides. These monochromatic backgrounds are occupied by human figures, often swimmers and bathers, whose androgynous, featureless bodies are roughly sketched, driven by an unbiased curiosity. The artist allows her imagery to acquire a porous malleability where a pictorial sign becomes a signifier. Bradford's practice has honed over 4 decades, maturing into a non-academic creative freedom that resonates deeply with the aesthetical and socio-political concerns of our time. It is her commitment to dynamic change and to the fluid state of human togetherness that Bradford so poignantly expresses in her radiant liquid fields. Katherine Bradford lives and works in New York City, and she is joining us today. Welcome, Katherine.
Thank you, Dexter. Thank you very much for this chance to speak with you.
Well, I'm very excited about today's conversation for a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, we met in person for the very first time about 4 months ago, give or take, in Tokyo for an exhibition, your first, exhibition in Tokyo, and your first time, oh, sorry, second exhibition in Tokyo, and your first time visiting. That was the
That's
first.
right.
And it was wonderful to see your work in that context and to also meet some of your family, extended family, what have you. So for everyone that's joining us today, I'm sure there's a lot of curiosity about what you're working on in this moment. I'm sure there's also some curiosity about your past. So I read a version of your bio, right? Because certainly there's probably 100 versions of your bio. Um, Take a moment and introduce yourself the way you normally would and how you talk about the work that you do.
Well, one of the first things that people talk about is that I had a late start, which is true. I was married with 2 children and already 30 years old when I decided that I wanted to be an artist, not a part-time artist, but a full-time, serious artist. Um, and I had gotten to know some artists, and so I began to realize what that entailed, what an artist was, how they lived, how they spent their time, what their priorities were. And I wanted to take that on. What I what I didn't know how I would do that, since I was already had a very full life with 2 little twin children that I was raising and a very ambitious husband. But little by little, I changed my life, moved to New York, um, got divorced, brought my 2 children with me to New York as a single mother, and started out on what many believed was kind of a precarious path. You want to be an artist in New York, but you've never been to art school. How are you ever going to make that a reality? Well, it's been quite an adventure, never boring.
Indeed, indeed. And so I'm curious to know about some of the early challenges that you faced, moving to New York City. I mean, you've explained sort of the circumstances. So the reason I'd love to hear more about that is because I'm certain that there are artists today sort of dealing with some of those same challenges.
The challenges I faced were how to belong to the community, how to be a member of the art world. And one of the luckiest things was I met a group of younger than me artists who were moving to Brooklyn, which this was in the 80s. And Brooklyn wasn't the place it is now. It was pretty rough. Inexpensive studios, not no galleries, nothing really that would tell you it was part of the art world. It was only a subway ride away, but people warned me that no one would come to Brooklyn to look at my work. That was an unwise step to get a painting studio in Brooklyn. You
I
know
mean,
what?
I think
You know what, Dexter, smiling now? He grew up in Brooklyn.
indeed, indeed. So I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and everything that you're saying, it makes me smile because um, there was such a distinction between Brooklyn and Manhattan when I was growing up.
Right.
I mean, honestly, you could say that distinction really didn't start to dissipate until only just a couple of decades ago. I mean, really, there was always this sense that Manhattan was the city. In fact, when I was a kid, that's what they would call Manhattan, the city. So if you were in Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy, and you were going to Manhattan, they say, "Oh, you're going to the city." So
And
even
I
psychologically,
remember Barbara Streisand's song, Secondhand Rose. And one part she laments that she's actually from Brooklyn, not New York. I
mm,
remember
mm.
that because I didn't really have an idea of what the distinction was either.
Yeah, and so I visited you in your studio a couple of months ago at this point, more or less, and I was reminded of what Williamsburg was like, in the 80s and in the 90s, early 90s, and so you're in this new environment. This is going back in time. What were some of the things that were influencing your artwork? What were you painting? What were you concerned with? What was, sort of what were you seeing?
Well, it seemed in the 80s that the most forward-looking and uh, bold painters were abstract guys. Julian Schnabel, for instance, was fascinating to everyone. So my artist friends and myself, we started painting abstractly. Um, I was making small paintings because it was too expensive to make big paintings. I really had a long way to go because now I'm a figurative painter, as you've explained, and I gradually came to make bigger paintings. I did it little by little.
You have a two-person show that just opened in Paris a few days ago at this point, and it's with an artist that I believe you had a long-term friendship with.
That's true. It was Chris Martin who I met in the early days, and he's quite a bit younger than me, very ambitious, and he kind of showed me the ropes and exposed me to a lot of attitudes that I was moving from Maine, which was a much less ambitious scene, and Chris was planning his museum retrospective at MoMA for the future. He's still planning that actually. But Chris and his friends taught me a lot.
When
They,
you say
they,
they taught you a lot, can you reflect on one or two things that you believe you learned or gained from those relationships?
well, I learned that they nicknamed me the student because they would, you know how artists talk about the shows they'd see. They'd say, "Ah, well, we went to see Christopher Wool and we loved it. We thought he was great." And I would say, "Well, wait a minute. Did you think every painting was great, or did you just think the ones on the first room were great. I mean, I had to teach myself how to look at art and how to find myself in a whole, it was like going into a huge library. What book are you going to read? Where are you going to place yourself in an enormous world?
One
I
of the
had
things.
a lot to learn.
Oh, well, I mean, I think I really appreciate that because similar to you, my timing and trajectory in terms of working in the art world was not the usual or sort of like common road. I've been a curator for nearly 18 years, but prior to that, I was in an entirely different business and space, the advertising and marketing space. And while you could draw some comparisons or connections, it certainly was a different world. And when I decided to take my curatorial work seriously and dedicate my life to it, there was a period of time where I had to humbly sort of admit what I didn't know and
Yeah.
start to accept that there was going to be a period of learning that was going to take quite some time, but bolstered with a certain amount of confidence to be able to express ideas that are not just the thing that you think people want you to say, but things that are really true to you and what you really feel. And what you mentioned about sort of, even though that was sort of, one example of, artists going to a show, like say Christopher Wool, saying, "Oh, it was fantastic," and then you saying, "Was everything fantastic?" It reminds me of something I used to encounter earlier in my career, where it seemed like everyone always said that everything was great, and I and I used to wonder, could everything possibly be great? Or people just being polite. And I don't mean the work that I'm doing is great, just in general. You'd go through Chelsea and you'd hop around to a few different openings. Oh, did you go see such and such? Oh, it was fantastic. What about this one? Oh, it was great. What? Oh, the greatest work they've ever done. And I started wondering, is this really what people feel? And when you get people alone and you can have some really deeper conversations, you start to realize that people do have opinions, strong opinions that are not just the everything is wonderful opinion. And you want to sort of pulling back the layers of that. And also from for me as a curator, wanting to be object kind, but also objective and having a point of view. Being able to say, I like this artist's work and I don't like this artist's work for these reasons. I think it's something that it takes some time to arrive at, to feel confident enough to arrive there. And you as an artist, to even be objective about your own work, to say, I've made some paintings that I love, and there's some paintings that I think if I could do them again, I would approach them very differently.
Honestly, I think that's one of the hardest things about being an artist is being honest about what's going on in your own studio and what paintings you're letting out of the studio. And how do you know which ones are valuable, really valuable, and which ones should be not shown?
Hmm. Hmm.
I
And
think
and
I think those are hard decisions.
They are, and they're made
For
even
me.
more difficult with pressure from the outside world, galleries, and others that who want to sort of bring the work out of the studio, show it, sell it, etc. And you as the artist have to sort of, guard your inner citadel, so to speak, and be sure that what the world is seeing is what you are happy with things that you produce that you're happy with, and not just sort of serving a demand. But that also leads me to something else I want to talk to you about. I mean, you mentioned earlier on, that it's been said that you had a sort of a late start. But although you may or have had a late start, there seems to be a tremendous amount of momentum now, and a lot of interest in your work and your career. And how does that feel? What's your thinking now about this journey you've been on? And then after that, I have a couple more questions before we look at some images.
Well, I feel very fortunate. I'm also a little nervous because I'm in my 80s now, and I hope I can stay in good health. And I like that word momentum. I hope the momentum keeps up. Um, I when I came to New York, I started taking jobs to earn money, and now my kids are grown, and I'm not doing any teaching, so I'm able to come to my painting studio every day, including Saturday and Sunday, and work as hard as I want. And it's fabulous. I just love that. And it's a way to improve your work and to get more deeply into what you're doing. But I didn't really have the opportunity to do that when I was starting out because I was running a household and trying to earn money and feeling my way towards the art world. So the point I'm at now, I'm feeling very fortunate, and I hope it doesn't end.
Mm, mm. What's your typical day like in the studio, by the way? I'm just kind of curious. I think I read somewhere that you sort of don't listen to music. It's kind of quite quiet. I don't know if you still don't have a studio assistant.
All that's true. I found out that the my best decisions were made in the beginning of the day when I had the most energy. So I try and get here very early. It's quite nice. New York and Brooklyn are quiet and calm. Sometimes I feel when I'm walking towards my studio in Brooklyn, I'm the only one awake because it's so early. But if I can get a good early start, um, things work out better for me. I know a lot of artists like to work late into the night, but by the time the night comes, I'm tired and don't have the wherewithal to make the work I want to. And
Well,
it,
it's good to know yourself, right? And know
yeah,
what pattern works well for you. And even artists who are just starting out now in their 20s or 30s should take note of that. I mean, I think that there's definitely this sort of self-induced pressure. I've seen artists have this self-induced pressure that they feel like they have to be in their studio for 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day. And I often ask, well, is there a point of diminishing returns? I mean, perhaps 5 hours of really focused work where you're doing what you consider to be your best work is better than um, 5 additional hours of exhausted work where you're not thinking clearly and perhaps not making the best decisions. Um,
I think that's true. And I remember Bryce Marden said, you got to get to your studio, you got to be there with your work. And I spend a lot of time looking at what I've done and trying to figure out how I can make it better or try and figure out if it's any good at all.
and What I want to do now is I want to share my screen and share some of the images that I'd like to discuss. And as I mentioned earlier, almost half joking, given the time difference from where I am and where you are, it just happens to be early in the morning for me. And hopefully there isn't too much noise in the background. I'm so it's keeping my fingers crossed that this is remaining remaining quiet.
Is it actually Monday in Japan, whereas it's Tuesday here?
No,
No,
actually, so it's Wednesday.
it's
So
Wednesday in Japan, but Tuesday in New York.
correct. And so for me, it's 7:45 a.m. at this, well, 7:49 a.m. at this particular point in time.
And that's not a peak time for you?
It is definitely peak time for me.
Oh, it is a peak time. Okay.
So we have quite a few images here of earlier works or relatively earlier works and more recent works. And so what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about each painting. I have a few questions and certainly anything that you'd like to share. So let's begin here with Yellow Suit Diver. which sort of obviously prompts the question of what brought you to the water, what brought you to bathers and swimmers.
Well, as I said, I started out putting really putting paint on canvas, and it looked a lot like water, even when it wasn't blue. So I was a color field painter, and then I would put marks in that field. Eventually, I realized that some of the marks looked like people, and why was I being reluctant to put a person in my work? Most of my friends, and they still are abstract painters. A lot of my friends. Uh, so the fields took to putting boats and swimmers and bridges and moons and planets in them. The reason I'm starting with this diver painting, um, it really opened up a whole new world to me because I realized I didn't have to put a person standing on the bottom of the painting with their head on the top,
Mm.
that I could free them into the air in a great leap. And for me, it was kind of a psychological leap. And I guess this painting symbolizes my own soaring forward. You
I
notice she's a little tentative. She's
Sure.
not super athletic. She's just kind of exploring that gray sky out there.
I like that symbolism of sort of leaping into the unknown, and also there's certainly something about this particular painting that does still sort of linger into the abstract. And you get that sense that there is certainly something that is literal here, but I also feel a looseness and a freeness that is still sort of tethered to this idea of color and shape and sort of a void that feels sort of feels like it is directly connected to your I guess I could say sort of abstract past.
Yes, that's true.
And I also want to talk a bit about this reference to, I've heard the term featureless used a lot, but I don't think that's true in terms of the figures in your work. It just seems to me that there are other concerns, that you're not concerned with, you know, ears and eyes and noses and mouths, although you are concerned with the humanity of the figure.
Yeah, I'm concerned with body language. This painting was going to be a table with people sitting around it, but I didn't get, when I looked at it, it didn't really look like they were sitting at the table. They were bent too far forward. So I changed it a little to men in dark suits slurping up water.
Which is actually quite kind of a bizarre image.
And more interesting, I think, than what
Absolutely.
I had originally intended. And that has been a guiding principle in the way I work, that often I discover what the painting is as I'm doing it. I have to watch closely and see where it's going. And this turned out to be men leaning over a pool of water,
It's
very
interesting. It
simply
feels
put.
almost it almost feels like what one would see with animals sort of arriving to the watering hole.
Yeah,
Um,
I could have called it watering hole, I suppose.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I was shy about putting people in my paintings because I thought I wasn't skilled enough to draw a face and hands and so on.
Talk a
So,
bit about that. Talk about that some more. You felt you weren't skilled enough. Were you
yeah,
comparing yourself to other artists, or was there something you thought yeah, can you just talk a little bit more about that?
well, I think when I started out, abstraction was the way to go if you wanted an enormous amount of leeway and room to experiment with the paint. You could drip it and you could stain it and you could throw it. That appealed to me a lot. And I wasn't interested in trying to master portraiture or perspective or skin tones or glazing, all those things. I wanted an experience with putting paint on the canvas. And when I realized that my paintings were turning into be scenes with people in them, I I made them very general. And it was often a spot of color that stood for the head or the legs.
Mm,
This painting was kind of a breakthrough because I used a lot of color. Um, these are 6 little boats with people standing in them, and I just piled the color on. It was so much fun. And in a way, it's about the reflections in the water and the color next to color that
mm.
makes this a painting.
So this work is from 2011. The prior work was roughly 2010, so we're talking about 15 years ago. Is that around the time when did you start making that sort of transition from abstraction into what could be called figurative work? Was it about 20 years ago? Was it around this time?
Yeah, it was about, I think the diver painting was one of my first successful non-abstract paintings.
And there's also this sort of darkness that often occurs in your work that's quite fascinating to me because I think that you may not think of it as sort of a brave or bold statement, but I see it as being very brave, to sort of deal with the night, to deal with the void, because I think that for a lot of people, um, they have a more difficult time connecting with darker work.
Or maybe they think if they're going to make a painting, it's got to have a lot of stuff in it.
Yeah, yeah.
Where I
Mhm.
realized that I could have a sky and ground and people, and that might be enough. It was the light in this that interested me. I saw these people kind of glowing, and it must be from the moon. I didn't really study the moonlight like Albert Pinkham Ryder would go down to the piers in New York and look at the moon and did those marvelous night moon paintings. I was making this up as I went along.
Do you think that your time in Maine has sort of influenced that sort of connection you have to the sky, the connection to the night sky?
I am very influenced by Maine. Um, it's I living on the coast of Maine, you see a lot of beauty, a lot of where land meets water meets sky. And I think that's just part of my memory, part of my visual bank, because it keeps coming out. I keep doing paintings that look somewhat like Maine.
Mm. So I'm happy we're looking at this particular painting here because I always find myself smiling when I see your work that has Superman in it. I don't know why. It always seems like a curious choice to then see as a recurring figure, a recurring theme. Can you talk about Superman in the context of your paintings?
Are you smiling because Superman is he's so vulnerable. He's not a strong man. I
Um,
painted him to be kind of human.
Sure. Sure. Well, I'm smiling for a number of reasons. And not to get into sort of like, comic book folklore, which I'm no expert on, but I always find that well, first of all, it's a very iconic, like, sort of almost pop figure in some ways. But also the term Superman is interesting to me because it's often used to say the opposite, as opposed to the idea of someone being all powerful. Sort of like, when so oftentimes you will hear someone say, "I'm not a Superman" or "I'm not a Superwoman,"
Oh,
right?
yes, that's true.
It's
Yeah,
used as a sort of explanation of
yeah,
why you are not able to do everything.
right.
But how did this particular character find its way into your work?
Well, the first image we saw of the diver in a yellow bathing suit, I got frustrated having to paint flesh color. I wanted color. I wanted vivid color. I wanted red next to blue and yellow. Um, so I think accidentally maybe I made the feet too red and I thought, oh, they look like red boots. And then I made blue pants and what fun to make red underpants and a red cape. So
Hmm.
I remember when I started the Superman series, I had to go online and look up how Superman actually looked because I didn't really know a lot about Superman. I hadn't been an American boy doing superhero drawings. It
Right.
came out of somewhere else. And I delighted in freeing him into the air, but making him look rather tentative in a way. I wanted this Superman to be uh, open emotionally.
Well, I think this also connects to the first painting that we looked at. I mean, in an interesting way, the act of diving is sort of the closest to flying one can get, sort of, from the ground, diving into a pool, diving into the ocean, etc. And I think that it's sort of a common thought in the back of someone's mind, like, I'm flying, I am Superman. It sort of like connects those things. I have young children, and oftentimes they'll tie something around their neck and pretend to be a superhero. So I see that sort of direct connection.
Yeah,
Also, it's a character that sort of fits into this idea of using the void, using the space. So I quite
right.
like. I think that that's great. Um,
You
so
know,
let's.
you keep using the word void, and I'm going to have to think about that some more because I think it's true that I'm creating a void and then putting something in it.
Yeah, I think there's a certain symbolism. I mean, I think about my relationship to the ocean in an entirely different way now, because I live in a place where it's very nearby. And there's a certain beauty, but also a certain sort of fear due to its power and vastness and mystery. And I find that in your work as well. There's that beauty, but there's also that curiosity and that mystery. There's also, a meditative aspect to many of your paintings as well that I quite connect with. The sense that I can find myself in your work in a way that
Right.
I find quite wonderful.
You know, when I started putting people in my work, the audience for my work got much larger,
Mm.
much larger.
Well, I think that makes sense. I think that when people are, and again, people such a broad term. So what do I mean when I say people? I would say that um, art lovers and people who tend to go to galleries and museums who aren't necessarily steeped in sort of art academia or don't consider themselves to be incredibly sort of experienced collectors or what have you. When they are faced with an abstract painting, I think there's definitely some common challenges that they face, and one is it's sort of the first question is what am I looking at, right? And there's sort of the idea that one must see something readily recognizable in a painting in order to understand it, and I think that that's not true. I said, I think instead of asking yourself, what am I looking at? And this is a moment that changed my life. I stopped asking myself, what am I looking at? And started asking myself, what am I feeling? And that
Right.
changed my relationship with painting because I no longer felt the burden to have to understand right away. In fact, if it takes me years to understand, that's probably indicative of a great painting because I have had to unpack it for a very, very long time. But one thing is for sure, you're going to feel something. And that feeling is a guidepost for you, I think, in terms of entering a painting. But anyway, I digress. And so
No, no, I like this idea of uh, posing a question. And the question sometimes I pose is, what is this artist interested in when I don't understand it, which which can happen a lot. What is obsessing this artist, and try and find it out. If we go back to the person standing there, this is about looking out to sea, or looking out into the void, as you might say. So I've done many, many paintings of the backs of people, because when we're standing in front of a painting, we are doing exactly that. We are looking into another world. And what interested me about this painting was how I got the figure to merge with the ground, with the sky and the land. You're almost seeing through the figure, and I do that a lot.
Yeah, I have seen that occur in other works. This whole idea of translucency and transparency.
Right. Yeah, that is something I just love about paint, that you can see through it.
And this is sort of I guess sort of a common question, I'm sure. Are you painting from memory or are you painting from source material?
I don't do drawings, which I probably should admit to. Um, I'm starting to do more drawings, but I don't do preparatory drawings. I like to paint directly, and I don't use photographs, and I don't use computers and so on.
Well,
So,
I think you've amassed, enough experience in life and memories to draw on as sort of your sort of data bank of references. Let's talk a bit about this painting here, which is quite different from what we've seen so far.
well, the ship came because I could see it in the water. And you notice I made the water transparent in the bottom. And my abstract love of repeating dots and things, I just decorated that ship. So and I made you almost see through the ship. Uh, there's a lot of transparency to the hull of the ship. So I think this painting would be a big disappointment to people who like marine painting because I didn't describe a beautiful, elegant boat.
Well, so you just said the word beautiful, which is a word that I often think about in relation to contemporary art, and I know there's been lots of discourse and a lot written about, what does it mean when you say something is beautiful, and is that a bad word, and is it sort of a dirty word in the context of, highly sophisticated intellectual art? But do you think about beauty as you're making your work? Is that a word that often comes into your thinking?
Yes, yeah, I'm for beauty. I'm for beautiful paintings. And also I notice that my fellow artists want to get your attention by painting something, oh, I don't know, important. But often it's just off-putting,
Hmm.
I find.
Let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, I think, and I don't want to get off track in terms of looking at the additional images that we have, but I do find that as sort of like a fertile ground for a conversation in terms of what what some people think the purpose of a painting is, and what sometimes I feel that people are projecting their own desires on what they think an artist should be doing. And I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. I mean, we're obviously in a very fraught political moment, but I often feel that you could say that about almost every moment. Every moment in a
Yeah.
lifetime is fraught in some ways. Um, do you find that your work allows you to sort of remain in a sort of a calmer space, because you're obviously not addressing politics or social issues or what have you, but I think that the work still serves a very important place in our current discourse.
Well, take this painting, for example. When I did it in 2015, um, Harper's Magazine published it in their summer issue. And I thought, oh, well, that's nice. I mean, it's a summer painting, people frolicking in the water. Uh, but then during COVID, I looked at this painting 5 years later and I saw something different. I saw it was about fear. I had titled it Fear of Waves, but all these people are running away from something that they don't understand, that they think is more powerful than they are, which is the oncoming wave. And that's how we all felt during COVID. Um, we were trying to get away from danger. And I saw this painting not about frolicking in the summer beach. I saw it about trying to avoid something that might hurt you.
It's very, very interesting how time can offer new perspective. I think that
Yeah,
quite interesting. Also, I think that, in another decade's time, there might even be a different read on what such a painting means.
I
Uh,
hope so.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, Definitely one that I truly, truly admire. So I
The,
think this work here kind of ties to some of the things we've already sort of been talking about, the translucency, transparency, the the sort of intimacy within the work as well.
yeah, and again, I asked myself, are you being sentimental here? What's going on? I, I'm a, I'm a lesbian and I'm doing a picture of a heterosexual couple holding hands. Is that a cop out? Well,
Well, I did you come to any conclusions?
people like this painting, and uh I've done other paintings of that are a little more queer.
Hmm. And so this particular work, Camping Trip, I mean, I think that this is such a powerful painting in the context of your overall work because I think it has so many of the key elements that have found themselves in other paintings of yours. You have the sky, you know, it's you have the night, you have swimmers, you have this sort of uh, terrestrial slash extraterrestrial environment. But this is 2016, so this is still about a decade ago. But I feel like this is a bit of a breakthrough painting.
You're right. And I was kind of tickled, Dexter, that you found this painting and wanted me to talk about it because it wasn't one that I chose, was it?
No.
Yeah, I wish I could make more paintings like this. That was just a good day that happened.
That's a fantastic, fantastic work. So in the interest of time, I'm going to start moving faster through the works here. So um, can you talk about the title of this painting?
I'm speaking to a father, aren't I?
You are.
Well, I had done the Starry Sky, which I like to do, and I'd put an airplane in it. And I kept looking at the painting and saying, this painting is not interesting. It's very boring. And I finally got the inspiration to put something unexpected in the middle of the painting, which was a pool of water in space. And then I went around the pool putting these guys. It seemed like a kind of ritual. They're all kind of the same, like it's a club.
Mm,
And I was asking myself, well, what are they doing up in the sky? And then I thought, well, maybe they're our forefathers looking down on us, looking down on the people in the on the earth. And a friend of mine said, oh, don't call them forefathers, just call them fathers.
mm. Good choice. Good choice. Yeah, it's an incredibly sort of mysterious and ethereal work that I think similar to the prior work has a lot of the same characteristics but certainly much more unusual. I mean you can sort of ground yourself in Camping Trip in a way that you can't in Fathers. Um, Unclear what is happening there, and I quite like that. I like that mystery. I like that sort of that it's so vastly open to interpretation in that way.
Good. I deliberately chose paintings that were kind of breakthroughs to me because to put swimmers in outer space is something I'm doing a lot now,
Hmm.
but I arrived at it
So there's a
accidentally.
huge leap of difference between Fathers 2017 and this work Fever 2020. Now,
Yeah,
of course, it's 3 years in time. Of course, 2020, start of the recent pandemic, one can draw a connection there. But I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I finally broke my rigid view that we should paint from our inner life and not in response to the headlines. When COVID came, I just felt this was an enormous global plague and that I needed to respond to it. And I did work about COVID, and this is about, that hand on the head and I called it Fever, is about us caring for each other, about some of us being sick and needing to be taken care of.
What's also striking to me about this work and this idea of care is that I definitely see a sort of a recurring sense of familial relationships
Yeah.
in your work, which then sort of makes me think of care. And this particular work, loading mother into circus canon, isn't necessarily what one would think about in terms of care, circus canon. But nevertheless, there is a certain sort of delicateness to this work. And there is a certain intimate relationship between these figures. But then does this work begin to tie into your interest in circus performers and acrobats?
Yes, I think so. I had a exhibit and I called it Mother Joins the Circus. It and all the paintings were had acrobats and circus people in them. And the gallery didn't want me to call the show Circus People because she thought maybe that was not a good idea. Circus people needed their dignity. They didn't need to be set aside as a different group. So I said, well, how about if I called the show Mother Joins the Circus? And she said, oh, that's fine. But it took me a long time to figure out why I was interested in Mother joining the circus. But I finally figured out that it was what my children thought I had done by becoming an artist.
Yes, I can see that. I can see that.
Good. I'm glad you laughed, and I'm glad I don't have to explain it.
Well, from someone outside looking in, becoming an artist is akin to the idea of saying, "Yes, I'm about to join the circus." I mean, I could see how it could elicit a similar response.
Well, you don't want your mother to join the circus. You
Exactly.
want her to stay home and be your mother.
Exactly. Um, So let's get to this image and a few more, and then in our final few moments, I have a couple more questions I'd love to ask you. So, very um, very briefly, this work seems quite different direction, but also still 2021. So we're still in the pandemic. You're probably still thinking about that.
Yes, I was. And fear of waves, fear of dark. I even did a painting called Fear of Onions. So that was something. Now, see, this is a very personal painting because
In
I
what way?
I had to disown my identity as a housewife to become the full-time artist. And I think that's what this painting is about. Um, there was a smush of white paint there, and I just left it. I thought, I can't really tell you what this means.
Hmm. Well,
Can
let's leave
you?
it open. Let's leave it open to interpretation. I have my own reactions and responses, but I believe that in many ways, the fact that it's not 100% clear is a good thing.
Yes,
I think that's the idea here. Um,
right.
this work, I think, is exciting to me because it it feels so. So let me ask you this. Obviously, you're still looking at art, looking at artists. Are there artists today that you find yourself, sort of whose work you're really interested in and excited by?
Oh, yes. I was just in Paris and Picasso. Wow. Guess what? He's a great painter. And I was just in the big group show that Chris Martin curated at his gallery, Anton Kern in New York. There's a great Rose Wiley painting in that show. There's a great Milton Avery painting in that show. There's a great Marston Hartley painting in that show. I think there, and my own painting, and I think what unites it is sort of a mystical reverence for the
Mm.
world. I think that's maybe what you were approaching, talking about the void and the night, and it's mysticism. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. And I'm also interested in this jump here, this color, what I would consider almost to be a color jump. Now, I know that sometimes photography can affect how we view a painting, but I would hazard to say that there is a certain stark difference in the color frequency between these two works. And so this is brighter, this is bolder. Um, is that it? Was that sort of a decision you made, or was it sort of just happened to be that you started working in this more vibrant hue?
I still go back and forth. If you looked at my studio now, there's some very brightly colored paintings, and there's some more muted, soft paintings, like the one just before it. I don't know why I do that.
Hmm. Um, Sometimes the beauty is in not knowing. I'm going to
I'll
skip
say,
ahead two works in the interest of time. I want to talk about the circus performers and the acrobats and sort of you said something very I think interesting to me or intriguing to me at our recent artist talk at Alexander Bergurin's gallery, and that was sort of drawing the connection between the swimmers or the bathers and the circus performers or acrobats. And could you talk about that?
yeah, I was doing a swimmer, and I was not painting it very well, and it started to look like an acrobat, like a circus person. Um, and I went with that. And
Mm.
that's where I find my ideas, um, by putting paint down and seeing what it might mean. I don't really know a lot about circuses and circus people. I know that it's a good metaphor, just like swimming and diving is a great metaphor. And I think I've used it as that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that the approach to the sort of circus or acrobatic works is very similar to the approach to the bathers or the swimmers in terms of how you're painting the figures, how you're dealing with the color blocking, the backgrounds in the
Yeah,
foreground, the sort of freedom you're giving yourself to, to have objects leave the canvas, that everything doesn't need to be so perfectly sort of situated top to bottom, right to left, that you're sort of forcing the viewer to sort of imagine what is going on, for lack of a better word, off screen, off camera, so to speak.
right.
I quite like that. And here I believe Superman makes a reappearance.
So he does. I really, Dexter, I really like that phrase you used a little while ago. You said my image bank.
Mm.
And I would um encourage younger painters, younger artists, that is inevitably going to happen. Um, that you develop a vocabulary that you can draw on and put in your work. And I think that's what's happened to me. And Superman is part of my vocabulary. The swimmer is part of my vocabulary. And whatever they're doing here, I called it high wire act. So I put swimmers up on a high wire that has wheels.
Well, I think that the title of this work, High Wire Act, I mean, that's sort of a perfect title to end the slide presentation on, because I think that your career has been a high wire act in some ways. Just thinking about how you've navigated life. Before we began, I mentioned, the potential for noise in the background, and I'm sure we heard some. And you said, "Oh, full life," and 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 I take that as a compliment. The idea of one having a full life. In fact, just yesterday, I was having a conversation with my wife about someone. Um, no need to mention who it is, a celebrity. And I said, that person has had a full life. I would not trade my life for theirs, but they have had a full life. They have been admired, they've been vilified, they've been they've seen the world, they've done it all, they've been loved, they've been hated, they've met everyone you could possibly meet. What a full life. But a full life also means that you have the highs and the lows. So there's a question here that I want to try to get to before we conclude today. It says, I read your son's author's essay about your exit through the window as the beginning of your journey and decisions you've made. Since self-doubt and self-criticism is a permanent part of being a painter, how do you deal with this? How did you deal with this early in your career? How did you deal with self-doubt?
I just want to say that that story that I jumped out of the window when I was a housewife to avoid a luncheon with my husband and his cronies, it lives on. So that becomes the first question today about jumping out of that window. Anyway,
It's such an apt. I mean, you have to admit that is a delicious metaphor
it is. It
on
is.
so many levels.
And I had forgotten that I had done that. But my children came home one day and said that their father had told them that story. So
Well,
he remembers it.
Well, on so many levels. I mean, the idea of having a career as an artist is a bit like that. That you may not be able to have that career if you try to go out the front door. You may have to jump out the window. And I don't mean jump out the window from a high rise. It just simply mean you may need to find another way out,
You
which
won't have that career if you stay in the kitchen.
well, amen to that. Amen to that. And for, and I think for any aspiring, before I say this, I want to also check myself on something. Because I often find myself saying, for any aspiring artist, for anyone, becoming an artist, and I often wonder if that's true. I feel like you are an artist. You're not an aspiring artist. If you're an artist, you're an artist. That's obviously a conversation perhaps for another day. But I would say that for the artists that are joining us today, and perhaps will look at this in the future, bravery is important. Bravery is not fearlessness. Those are two different things. I think it's unrealistic to be fearless because we all will face fears, but bravery is acting in the face of fear and doubt. And so to that question about how did you deal with doubt, self-doubt, I'd like to talk about that for a moment.
Um, my family, particularly my mother, was very against me being an artist because I was ruining my marriage and she thought it would ruin my children, her grandchildren, and that I was really messing up everything by this decision. Um, so I didn't talk about it. I didn't tell her what I really wanted. I was in the closet about that, much more in the closet. In several years, I fell in love with a woman and became a gay person. And I really wasn't in the closet about that, as much as I had to be about being an artist.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. So
Well,
could
thanks
you
for saying that.
we're coming toward the end here of our conversation today, but I do have one or two additional questions I'd like to ask if you don't mind. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of momentum. in the past decade or two around your work, and was there ever a moment where you were worried that you wouldn't be recognized, that you wouldn't get that momentum?
Oh, yes. I'm still worried. I mean, I don't think the artist career is a sure thing ever. You know that.
It's very true. It's very true. I also think when I talk to the more emerging, younger, well, it's interesting emerging because I also think that emerging is a misleading term because you can still be an emerging artist in your 50s or 60s, which is a whole nother conversation. But when I talk to artists who are significantly younger in their, say, let's say, than me, even like in their 20s, I often remind them that if you are truly committed to this, you're talking about 60 more plus years of making work,
God willing.
God willing. And so there's so much more to learn, so much more to do, so much more to say. And for artists who are in that sort of that generation, that 25-year-old artists who are putting themselves under so much pressure, I think some of it comes from the economic situation
Yeah.
that we find ourselves in now. That there's this sense that if you want to make a living as an artist now and it is your sole work, you're under a different kind of pressure. But I think the pressure is always there. Whatever generation you're in, whatever time frame you're in being an artist, as you mentioned, the pressure may be coming from family members not understanding what it is you're doing or why you've chosen to do it. The pressure could come from a spouse. The pressure could come from so many different places. And then it could also be about the kind of work that you choose to make. So I really appreciate you, Catherine, and appreciate the art that you are making and bringing to the world. I can tell that it's fulfilling to you. It's certainly fulfilling to me to know you and to get to unpack more and more about your work, and I feel your warmth and your generosity of spirit in terms of how you talk about the work that you do and the relationships that you've built with other artists over the years and the communities that you've been connected to. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Dexter. You are giving me exactly what an artist needs, which is to be understood and to be seen. And what a lovely conversation we've been able to have. I really appreciate it.
Well, as the sun sets behind you in Brooklyn and the sun rises above me in Japan, I'm going to say thank you very much for today's conversation. Thank you to New York Academy of Art for creating this platform. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today and everyone that watches this in the future. Catherine, I will see you very, very soon. Thank you very much.
Farewell, Dexter.
Farewell.